I went to Rutgers School of Law in Camden, and got my law degree. And before that, I graduated from University of Delaware, and I transferred there from University of Virginia. I went from Rutgers. I was a clerk on the Court of Chancery for Chancellor Bernard Bailick. Then I went to Young Conaway, where I practiced employment law. Then I went to the ACLU of Delaware, where I was the executive director for almost 10 years. Then I went and worked for state government in the Markell administration, and finished out my time there as Governor Markell's chief of staff. And now I am the chief communications and experience officer for ChristianaCare, which is a health system here in Delaware. Interestingly enough, it was a very hot market for lawyers at the time, and I had a number of offers to choose from. I got wonderful advice from the judge I worked for to find out which partner I'd be working for at any of the places I had job offers, and then he told me, basically he said, Sheldon Sandler, you will learn the most from Sheldon Sandler. He's a great teacher, and so that is how I ended up doing that. It's like, it's your job right now to learn how to be a great lawyer. So that this is a person you will really learn from, and it was a great advice. I give it to lots of people today. Go find out who your boss will be, especially for lawyers. That makes a big difference. I'm sure it does in your field as well. So who are you going to be the historian for, right? Who will you be working under and learning from? So that's how I ended up doing that, and I loved it. It was a great experience. And then I was there just a few years and before I went to the ACLU. It's funny. Judy Mellen announced that she was going to leave, and she took me to lunch and said, they're going to do a national search and they're going to do all the things, but I really think you should apply. I think you'd like it. I think you'd do a good job, and I think you should apply. And so I did. And I probably wouldn't have if she hadn't encouraged me to do so, because I think I would have assumed that, they do, you work at the ACLU, you know what that's like. It's a very competitive, job market, because it's such great work. And I applied and I got the job, and I had just the best career experience ever there. It was really wonderful. It was a wonderful opportunity. Yeah, it was life altering for everyone. September 11th made such huge changes, but you can imagine the change in the trajectory of work for the ACLU that arose out of September 11th. Anthony Romero, who is still the executive director of the National ACLU National, he and I started at the same time. So we both really, you go in and there was a great strategic plan and lots of things that we were concentrating on, none of which we stopped working on. But certainly the civil rights and civil liberties implications in the wake of September 11th tragedy were immense. And I think we live with some of the after effects of that day in the law even today. Yeah, I think like everyone, we were really shell shocked. And so I think at the ACLU, everyone was surprised, as everyone was in the country. This was such a shock to everyone's system, right? To have that tremendous loss of life and sort of an attack in the United States like that. I think the immediate understanding that most people had in our work was the tremendous anti-Muslim sentiment that erupted quite quickly, and a lot of violence against Muslim people, and a good deal of violence against Sikh people, because people didn't understand anything about who they were, or the fact that the turban that they traditionally wear has nothing to do with anything other than their Sikh religion. And so I think everybody saw that almost immediately, that tremendous danger for people um, of the Muslim faith. So I think we saw that quickly. My colleagues at the ACLU saw immediately the danger. I mean, remember that, the ACLU's roots are in the years, following the Palmer raids. I mean, we literally emerged as an organization out of a time of immense sort of nationalism and, suspicion of anybody who did not, sort of hew to certain, beliefs around the United States, patriotism, and so forth, right? So, and of course, all of the work that had been done over many years around sort of government, the acts of the government overreach. So I think, I was brand new. I did not certainly have that background, but it was very quickly apparent as I spoke to my colleagues that they could see what was coming, or at least sort of, have a strong suspicion about what might be coming our way, and they were really alert to any changes. And of course, it's not long after 9/11 that the Patriot Act is passed in, a matter of days. It's an immense piece of legislation, and it was produced quickly, it was passed quickly, but it really was the content of that legislation was the culmination of years of work of people who wanted the government to have these kinds of powers of surveillance and detention and so forth in place. So, this was, I think one of my colleagues at one point said, it was sort of everybody's wish list got sort of, pulled together into this one bill, and then it got sort of shoved over the line very quickly and without much consideration. By then, there was a certain amount of an allocation to each affiliate that sort of basically kept us open, but nothing else, right? And that was true because the donors to the ACLU National and the National Board really were determined to have a presence in every state, no matter how small, like Delaware, or no matter, there are some states that are larger, but don't, for all kinds of reasons, have a huge donor base for the ACLU, right? So they might need outside support. I'm thinking about certain states in the South, for example, where finding enough donors to keep an ACLU running year after year was challenging. So every state had an ACLU, so we had that money coming in every year. But no, it was a very frugal effort. I used to laugh sometimes because we punched way above our weight in the sense of the work that we did, the impact that Judy had was really something. And I used to laugh and say to people, come on up to my office and I'll give you a tour and I'll show you both the smoke and the mirrors. Because we really did, we really were able, I think, in part because of Judy's leadership and the board and all the people that had come before, and in part because of the remarkable support we got from, intellectually and otherwise from our colleagues at the national office. I don't know a better way to say it. We punched way above our weight. And it allowed us to really have a springboard to grow. And we had grown by the time I left. And so, and I think that Anthony Romero is a remarkable leader and builder and visionary for the ACLU. And I think he's built out the vision and structure and activism, right, and organizing at the national level. I think we felt the great effects of that at all of the state affiliate offices. Yeah, when I think about you guys, 12 people in a big office, like I'm sitting in an office now that is, my personal office is approximately the size of the entire operation inside the community service building when I started. At one point, I had all of the files of the organization basically stacked on a wall behind my desk because we had run out of space in our tiny little storage area. And yes, it was really quite something. We had an AOL account, which I paid for myself because we didn't have a credit card. It was so much fun. We had such great and such generous donors and so many people. I think the other thing that was really remarkable about sort of in terms of like what you have as assets, the attorneys that gave their time and effort. When I think about what that represents now and certainly what it represented then, in terms of, if we had to account for that on a balance sheet, we would have looked a good deal more wealthy, right? That there were some really remarkable, and still are, lots of people doing pro bono work on behalf of the ACLU. That's sort of, it's hard to even calculate the worth of those efforts. Well, I wouldn't say we were way over our heads. I would say we punch above our weight. I think back, I'm sure Judy told you quite a bit about, the work that was done at Fair School. I mean, that's a great example of sort of, a largely volunteer group coming in and making a huge impact on people's lives. I think we had a really remarkable impact as an organization in the fight for LGBT rights, for example, in the legislature. Sort of, we've got those three legs, right? We have litigation, we have lobbying and advocacy, and we have public education, right? And I think one of the things that we did well as an organization, and again, I think this is can be attributed, I hope, to my leadership and to the board and to others, but I think we were an early entrant into sort of fairly professional advocacy at the state legislative level. I think we saw tremendous opportunities in certain areas around prison reform, criminal justice reform, LGBT rights for kids in care, rights for kids in custody, and any number of other racial justice issues related to police and other issues as well, education, to really see the power of actually changing the law as well as challenging the law. And we had some pretty good successes in legislative hall. We had great partnerships with legislators there, and that was where I think we really began to see some real success, I think, in shaping the policy and legal culture here in Delaware out of that work. We were still, of course, litigating. We had a remarkable case with a plaintiff, Penny Marshall, who you should talk to, who was a federal public defender and Harvard graduate who was stopped by the Delaware State Police and held at gunpoint on a traffic stop for reasons no one has ever really, I think, truly established what the basis of that stop was in the first instance. And I think that was a really impactful case for the state. We had lots of great legal assistance from, including from a great civil rights lawyer out of town and some local people that really resulted in some heavy scrutiny of police practices here in Delaware along the 95 corridor. And if you're too young to recall, but during that time, there was a whole series of lawsuits related to stops along I-95, growing out of a policy that was promoted by the DEA that literally said things like stop people who look Jamaican, and search their cars. And so that sort of traffic stop, we did some work there on those traffic stops and the disparate impact on people of color. Managed to get some early research and responsibility from the state police themselves on those cases and on what was being done on the roadside to people of color. One of the things we got into that was, so they were doing a count of how many people got stopped, right? And I think one of the things we added to that conversation was to make them also keep account of how many consent searches there were. So searches without probable cause, right? That they just either said they had or people had consented to having their cars searched because the rate of consent search was really, really different. for white people and for people of color. Look up the DE, the Drug Enforcement Agency had some insane policies, and I believe that's what they said. But, find people who look like they're from the islands or from Jamaica. We can correct the historical record on that to make sure I'm accurate. But it was pretty extreme, and it was, and I think what we learned, and if memory serves, and I doubt there's any documentation out there at this point, but what we learned was that where people were searched, Hispanic drivers had the very lowest incidence of any illegal substances being found, followed by Black people who had a lower number. The highest incidence of actual fruitful searches was for white males. So, take from that what you will. So, it was a real. I thought that was a very worthy conversation for us to begin to have as a country, to really think about the very different experiences and really illustrate and show to people the very, very different experiences people have when they encounter the police, depending on their race.